My name is Amy Rowan, and I'm the suburban sexologist. Today, I'm going to tell you my story about regaining intimacy after having a double mastectomy. This topic is near and dear to my heart for several reasons. One, because it's a process that I went through about 7 years ago. And two, because as a sexologist, this is something that I have had many women talk to me about, and they've really struggled to find the resources to help them understand what's happening to their bodies and help them learn how to regain this very important part of themselves. So, let me share a little bit with you about my story. In 2017, I found a lump in my breast. Actually, it wasn't in my breast, it was up in my chest. And it was very interesting because it was pretty high. It was up here. I was 38 years old at the time, and I went to the doctor. The doctor felt the lump, and she said that she felt many cancerous lumps, and she was not concerned about mine. But she went ahead and ordered a mammogram, which was my very first mammogram, because she said, let's just go ahead and get a baseline mammogram and rule this out. I'm so grateful that she did, because this turned out to be my first and last mammogram. I showed up for the appointment. My husband did not even come with me because we really were not concerned at all. However, it went downhill quickly. The technician was in there. She kept asking questions. She kept doing more and more images. She said we had to do an ultrasound. And I could just tell by the way her demeanor changed that things were not going very well. I was diagnosed at age 38 with ductal carcinoma in situ. This is stage 0 breast cancer, which is something that I did not even know existed. However, I was very, very lucky to have caught it as early as I did. Basically, what I had was cancerous cells had spread all the way throughout my right breast, but they were still contained within the milk ducts. And so from what they can tell, it had not become invasive yet. However, there was a time is of the essence situation, and I went from diagnosis to double mastectomy within 5 weeks. I chose something called tram reconstruction. And what that meant was that they were going to use part of my ab muscles to help reconstruct my breasts. And so that meant on top of having the mastectomy, that I was also going to be having a very invasive abdominal surgery. And then after that initial surgery, I underwent 3 further reconstructive surgeries and got 3D tattoos. And this all took place over the course of about 2 years. The really good news, where I was very, very lucky, is that for me, it was one battle to win my war. After the double mastectomy, they sent off the breast for pathology, and they confirmed that it was non-invasive. And so I did not have to go through the additional experiences of chemo, radiation, or tamoxifen, because my cancer was also triple negative. What I did not realize at the time is that triple negative breast cancer is actually the most aggressive kind and the most difficult to treat. So I was even more lucky to have caught it when I did. Because I didn't experience chemo, radiation, or tamoxifen, I can't necessarily speak to the very specific experiences of that, but I am going to try to address some of those situations as I can, and I'm going to provide some resources. Before I continue, the first thing that I want to acknowledge is that I am approaching this from the perspective of a cisgender woman in a heterosexual relationship. However, I do think that a lot of the advice and a lot of the insights that I'm going to provide are applicable to anyone, regardless of how you identify or your sexual orientation. As you can imagine, as someone goes through an experience like this, there's a lot of complicated emotions that come up. There are so many different layers. And for me, that manifested as a lot of fear. There was a lot of anger. I felt very, very betrayed by my body. And I was really afraid because I didn't know what I was going to look like. I didn't know if I was going to have feeling, what that feeling was going to be, or what that wasn't going to be. I knew that I was losing my breasts. I knew that I was losing my nipples. And I knew that I was having abdominal surgery, but I didn't know how that was going to affect my body, my feeling, or my ability to experience pleasure and orgasm. And of course, like most people, I immediately went to Dr. Google and started Googling, and I really wasn't able to find any kind of good information that could give me indicator of what was going to happen and what I was going to feel when I woke up. And, the other thing is, of all the doctors that I saw, not a single one brought this up either. And neither did I. I also did not ask any of those questions. In retrospect, I really wish that I had. I wish that I had been a stronger advocate for myself. But I do think that I was in such a deep state of shock throughout that entire experience that it just did not occur to me to really ask a lot of these questions. If you have a partner in this, your partner is also experiencing a lot of emotions. I just remember looking at the eyes of my husband, James. He'd been married for probably about 15 years at that point. We had three small children. My kids were 3, 6, and 9 as we went through this. And of course, he was trying to be strong for me. He was taking care of me through all of this. He was trying to be brave and hold me together because I was really pretty much falling apart through all of this. But I know that he was also terrified. Partners go through a whole different set of emotions as well. There's the caregiver dynamic. Of course, he was caring for me throughout all of my recoveries. Oftentimes, the partner has fears of hurting you, especially if someone's in longer term treatment, such as chemo or radiation. They're afraid of hurting you because you are in pain. You can be very fragile, and so they're afraid of that. Your partner also may have different fears about not wanting to bother or upset you, and so they hold their own emotions back. And the reality is, they don't know how to handle this either. It's such a difficult experience to go through all around. And another feeling that they may be experiencing is guilt or shame because they might want to be experiencing some sort of sexual intimacy during this time, or maybe it's even just closeness, but they really don't know how to manage those emotions either. So often, what happens in these types of situations is it feels easiest just to retreat. A lot of times, when people don't know what to do, they choose to do nothing. A lot of times, this just comes out of a place of fear. They're afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. They're afraid maybe of upsetting you or bringing up something that you don't want to talk about. And so oftentimes people just retreat and they do nothing. But really, the only wrong thing that can be done is nothing. To the person that's going through the experience, nothing can feel like they are being forgotten. Nothing can feel like you aren't thinking about them. And often that's not the case. But when other people are just going about their daily lives, when you are deep in this experience, it can really feel like you're being left behind, and that can hurt. So, the next thing that I'm going to share with you are some of the steps to help regain intimacy after experiencing double mastectomy, but I think this can also extend out to really any sort of major body disfigurement or surgery, because anything that really affects large portions of our body and we don't know how our body is going to react, I think this can be very applicable here. Again, I'm coming at this through my lens of my own personal experience, melded with my knowledge and education as a psychologist. So, the first and the most important thing to do during this time is to nurture intimacy and affection. These are very, very tiny giants, and they mean the absolute world, and they can really build the bridge of connection. Now, the first thing that I want to make sure that I clarify is when I use the word intimacy, I'm not necessarily talking about sex. Intimacy comes in many, many forms. Obviously, there's sexual intimacy, but there's also non sexual intimacy, there's physical intimacy, emotional intimacy, experiential intimacy, intellectual intimacy. There's several different types of intimacy, and it's important to continue to nurture that throughout this process. The goal of this is connection, because what connection does is it creates our own body's natural response of producing oxytocin. And oxytocin is that important feel good bonding chemical that makes us feel safe, it makes us feel cared for. And these are very important feelings and emotions to have, especially during this time. So, some things that you can do to nurture this intimacy and affection, they're pretty simple, really. Hand holding, cuddling on the couch, touch for the sake of touch. And this is, when I say that, I mean without intention. Words of love. All of these are very, very important ways to nurture that. Touch especially is really important during this time. There are so many people when they are going through treatment, whether it's cancer treatment or other types of medical treatment, where the only touch that they may start to receive is medical touch. So the only people that are touching them are nurses and doctors who are, taking their blood pressure, giving shots, or putting in IVs. And often what happens to the person in that experience is they start to detach from touch. It can create a detachment. And that really is a protective mechanism for what they are going through. So, touch, physical touch, touch with kindness can be very, very important to help that person stay connected with their body and stay connected in their relationship. There's also a high likelihood that sex or intercourse may be off the table for a period of time during this for any number of reasons. And so maintaining connection during that time, if sex or intercourse is off of the table, is really, really essential. So, what are some ways that we can maintain touch? I'm going to give you guys some words and phrases that can really help with this because, like I said, oftentimes people retreat into silence because they don't know what to say or do. So, here are some suggestions that I have for you. You can say things like, I'd like to be closer to you. Can we snuggle? Or, I'm really just loving you right now. I just wanted to let you know that. Or, I'm not looking for sex right now, but some kisses and hugs would be wonderful. Are you up for that? One thing that I found that I nurtured purposefully, especially as a mom, again, I told you my children were 3, 6, and 9 at the time. And can you imagine telling a 3-year-old that he can't hug and climb on his mom? It was a very, very challenging time, but we learned to do side hugs. And we also did what we called leg hugs, where we would interlock our legs. And so we found ways to continue to be affectionate, even though we weren't able to be affectionate in the way that we were used to. Some other suggestions would be reading aloud. I remember when I was in the hospital, my husband sat by my bedside and read my favorite book aloud to me. At that point, I had so many pain meds in my system, I wasn't really able to watch TV, and I was really miserable and in a lot of pain. And so he was just reading that book aloud to me. And I remember how much that meant to me at the time. The next tip that I have for you in regaining intimacy after mastectomy or a body disfiguring surgery is learning how to embrace the loss of spontaneity. Now, I just want to say one of the big things that I talk about as a sexologist is the myth of spontaneous sex. So many couples say, "Oh, I wish sex was spontaneous like it used to be." And I always have to challenge that a bit and say, sex really wasn't that spontaneous back when you were dating. You made a plan, you saw each other, you got really excited. So by the time you had that spontaneous sex, you'd been looking forward to it for a while. But especially in these types of situations, spontaneity may really have to go out the window. And the typical ways that sex and intimacy were initiated may also go out the window. Obviously, it's natural to experience a libido drop, a loss of desire, a loss of sex drive. And there's many different reasons for that. There's psychological reasons for that. There's physiological reasons for that. And the reality is there is no magical quick fix here. There are some things that you can do to help work around this. The first one is plan a touch date. This is kind of like scheduling sex, which is something that I always recommend for any of my busy couples that have a hard time finding time to be intimate. And a touch date is similar, where it's just a time that you actually schedule and that you are intentional about touching and being affectionate with each other. This is also especially important when you have someone who's going through longer term treatment, such as chemo or radiation. In those cases, I recommend that that person keep a diary of their fatigue and keep a diary of their pain. Because the reality is, you legitimately may be way too tired to want to intentionally connect in intimacy, or you may be in a lot of pain. But a lot of times, if you are able to keep a fatigue or a pain diary, then what you're doing is you're keeping a diary of when you are feeling that pain or fatigue over the course of about 2 weeks. And what a lot of people find when they do that is that they can find some predictable times when they are feeling a little bit better. And those would be the times to schedule those touch dates or schedule intimacy if you're up for it. My next tip that I have to share is communicate. And this one is challenging. The most important thing that I want to share with you is that you need to stop comparing yourself with everybody else. This is your own journey, and your journey is going to look the way that it looks for you. Talk to your care team, ask them questions. This is something that I did not do very well. And it's okay to ask them questions such as, do you know how long it'll be before I can be intimate with my partner? Or what can I expect as far as feeling in different areas of my body? Ask the questions to your care team. They may or may not be capable of answering them. A lot of doctors aren't properly trained in sex and intimacy, but it's certainly worth asking the question. And if you do need additional support in that realm, please feel free to reach out to me. There's also a really wonderful book that I recommend called A Better Normal, and it's by Tess DeVez. It's your guide to rediscovering intimacy after cancer. And I have to say, this book, I discovered it after my mastectomy, but there's a lot of really great information and questions to ask your care team in here. So this is a really great resource as well. Another thing to do with communication is ask your partner for touch or ask for what you want, because they may be afraid. They may be afraid to offer. They may be afraid to say the wrong thing. And they may be afraid to feel like they're putting pressure on you. So they may just not be saying anything. So if you want your partner to hold your hand or give you a kiss, just ask for it. It's okay. I give you permission to do that. Don't let the elephant grow. Address it. I think one of the biggest things that happens, and this happens outside of these types of situations too, is people don't know what to say. People don't know how to address it. And the elephant just grows and grows. So you can say things like, I'm really not feeling very sexual or sensual right now, but I miss you. And I really look forward to a time that I am. I'd really love a kiss. Or if it's not the right time, you can say something like, that sounds amazing, but this really isn't the right moment. Do you think you can touch base with me or reach out again? Let's talk about it again tomorrow at lunchtime. I also really like some specificity around here, because it's one thing to say, I'm not in the mood, maybe later. It's another thing to say, this isn't the right time, but let's talk about it again tomorrow. That leaves the door open rather than closing it. Another thing that's really important to do during this time is to touch yourself and reconnect with your body and get an understanding of what feels good. An interesting experience that I had was, I realized probably several years after my last surgery that my husband was avoiding my chest area when we were being intimate. And at first, I thought it was because maybe he wasn't attracted to that anymore. The funny thing was, I allowed these thoughts to go through my head. But finally, one day, I spent some time exploring my chest area, just to see what things felt like, because it did feel different. There were different areas that were numb and zings and things like that. And I asked my husband, I said, why don't you ever touch my chest anymore? And he told me, well, Amy, you told me it was numb and you didn't feel anything. And you said it felt weird. So I didn't want you to feel weird when we were being intimate. So I just didn't want to touch it. So I shared with him that it was okay and that it would make me feel good to have that be a part of our play. And so, of course, he started doing that again. But the ironic part is that I was just sitting there in my feelings, wondering if there was something wrong with me, when really he just had to have and be given permission to go ahead and start to explore. So talking is really, really important at acknowledging things within your relationship. The next part of this is really reclaiming your confidence. And there's so many different pieces that go into this. But here are just some general tips. Watch your social media use. If you're following accounts that make you feel bad about yourself, you can always hit unfollow on those. Eat well, exercise as much as you can. Buy new clothes that fit your new body. If your body has changed, I know that mine changed a whole lot. Buy some new clothes that make you feel really good about yourself. Be aware of behavior changes. If you find that you are avoiding social situations, maybe you're wearing a lot of baggy clothes, it might be worth reaching out to a therapist. Sometimes it's helpful to remove photos or reminders of your precancer body. That can be helpful for some people. Also, surround yourself with people who are positive influences in your life. Treat yourself. Take a bath, go to the spa, and touch, touch, touch. I don't know how much I can reiterate the power of touch here. Another thing that's okay is to embrace your shy. If you aren't comfortable being intimate, completely and totally naked, it's okay to wear a sports bra, or it's okay to keep the lights dim. Certainly, I wore a sports bra for a long time just because I was more comfortable like that. And that's okay. It's also important to grieve. It's a loss. There's a loss of who you were before, there's a loss of your body parts. And going through that process is very important. For me, a really huge confidence boost that I wasn't expecting, that came when I got my 3D nipple tattoos. So for those of you who don't know what those are, they're basically tattoos that are designed to look like a real nipple with a real areola with the little bumps and everything. They're very, very realistic. So when I woke up from my surgery, I didn't have nipples anymore. They'd taken some skin from my abdomen and put that where my nipples were. So I had what I personally called zombie boobs. They're kind of like Barbie boobs, just with a lot more scars. And it was hard. I would hop out of the shower even long after these surgeries were done, and I would catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and I would just see these zombie boobs, and I would see these scars, and it would just keep flashing me back into that experience when I'd been having a perfectly wonderful, normal shower and a perfectly normal, wonderful day. And then all of a sudden, I had to flash back into that time of grief and fear and pain. And that was really, really difficult. When I got these 3D nipple tattoos, it was an enormous confidence boost for me because when I would hop out of the shower, I would see what looked to me like a regular woman's body. And I felt whole again. And that was really, really important to me. My last piece of advice, and this is a big one, is don't be afraid to jump back in. I give you permission to jump back in. Sometimes the best way to get back to it is just that, get back to it. Change your definition of sex to include all types of pleasurable sexual touching, not just intercourse. There's plenty of fun to be had, even if intercourse is off the table. Let go of perfection. You might have to readjust the pillows. You might have to change positions. You might have to start and stop and start again. Maybe stop and maybe it doesn't work the first time or you aren't able to finish, but you aren't broken and it's a process. And so even if you started and had to stop, celebrate that you started it all. That's the really, really important part. Give yourself and give your partner grace and patience. So, part of my healing process, something that was very important for me, was becoming intimate again. I really wanted to know that my body worked. I needed to feel and know that I was still okay. It was an important part of me feeling like me. It was an important part of me feeling like a woman and a wife. And I just wanted to know what feelings I did still have. I wanted to know if I could still have orgasms. I wanted to know if I could still experience pleasure. I didn't know. And I was terrified that my body was not going to work anymore. That's really what I thought. So for me, 2 weeks after my surgery, I really wanted to try. And I really wanted to try and be intimate with my husband again. I think I surprised him, but we did. We did try. It was very careful. It was very slow. There were lots of pillows. There was lots of giggles and laughs and trying to figure things out because I was still not moving very well. I might have even still, actually, I think I'd just gotten my drains out. But it helped me to know that my body was still my body and that I was still a woman, even beaten, scars and all. To be clear, I'm not saying that this is for everyone. If you aren't ready, you do not need to jump into that. But it was a very important part of my process. And it was important for me to feel like me again and feel like a woman. And the really beautiful thing that happened is once I overcame that fear, it was easier to, again, feel a little more normal, feel a little less broken. And I do think it was an important step in my healing process. And so it really helped me feel like myself and not like the sum of my scars. I'm thrilled to say that I am celebrating 7 years cancer free. And I'm also celebrating 20 years married to my husband this year. And our sex and intimacy is the best and the most creative that it has ever been. Things are never going to be exactly the same as they were, but I venture to say that honestly, they're even better. And this entire experience brought us even closer together. So, to wrap this up, what I want to share with you, whether this is you that is going through this experience, this is your partner that's going through this experience, or a loved one, because statistically speaking, 1 in 8 women will experience breast cancer in their lifetime. I give you permission to explore pleasure, and I give you permission to explore differently. You are more than the sum of your scars. You are deserving of pleasure. And I want to offer that as a gift to you. I'd like to invite you to join my Intimacy Ignition course, which is a monthly subscription. And this includes a wealth of life changing activities and techniques. And it's a comprehensive set of resources that will help you unravel the complications of communication and intimacy. Plus, you also get invaluable live coaching support from me every month that you're in the program. You can join and learn more about the Intimacy Ignite program at my website, suburbanintimacy.com. I invite you to come to my website and download my free workbook, Regaining Intimacy After Mastectomy. I've compiled a lot of resources and information here that can help you start to step back and experience the pleasure and intimacy that you deserve and that you're craving. Thank you so much.